Oh, I really feel like I'm in the right room. It's such a privilege to be here and part of this discussion. I work in the media, and and so I wear a different professional hat sometimes. But I'm going to speak to you more personally about my experiences working as a photojournalist. I've been covering war and conflict for the last 20 years and worked in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Gaza, West Bank, and in Ukraine for the last 11 years. But my first experience of violence was inside my childhood home. And that was sort of shaped by an implicit sort of culture of silence. And I was very drawn as a small child to poetry and to music and to art that talked about the experience of violence, because I could relate to it in a very naive and childlike way. And I remember thinking that if somebody beyond my nuclear family just knew about what was happening, then maybe they would come or they would for sure stop it. Why would you allow these things to happen? So when I was 16 and I had just gone to college to start my A-levels, I came across a book of war photographs of the Vietnam War. It really stopped me in my tracks because I had never seen pictures of what war really looked like. And I didn't know that there was someone whose job it was to make pictures of that so people who weren't there could understand it in some way. And I really, again, made a naive assumption that photojournalism could be part of a solution to violence. It took me many years to train, to learn the skills necessary to work as a photojournalist in war zones around the world. And by the time I'd really, honed my craft, I understood that wars don't happen because nobody knows about it. And I had also at that point discovered that my family members outside my nuclear home, my nuclear family also knew what was happening. So it wasn't an issue of people knowing or not knowing. But I have noticed often over the years that there is some power in being with people when they are victim to violence, whether it's inside the home or on a mass scale. And so my personal approach to war photography is, of course, partly to bridge this gap and this othering that occurs when we tell visual war stories that lead us, or that I believe lead us to think that war is probably something that could never happen to us. It happens to other people in other places who look very different to us. Usually they're carrying bags, living in tents. There are, at the point that people are photographed in war zones, they may have looked just like us 2 weeks ago, but they appear to be very different. And so part of the work that I'm doing with Alyssa Sopova, whose voice you heard earlier in that short documentary, an anthropologist and a writer from occupied Donetsk city, is to turn to people like me, the outsider who hasn't experienced missile strikes and occupation in my hometown or community and of my home, and to try and bridge that gap of othering. But it's also to turn to Alyssa's community, and this sounds very grandiose, and we're aware that in the course of a lifetime we won't be able to change very much, but communities who are experiencing extreme violence and who become very physically disconnected from the rest of the world, I believe that telling stories about war is important for them as well, so that they know that they're not alone. Now that sounds very kind of sort of ideological, but really to show up in a frontline town that's pretty much only occupied by soldiers, as a foreigner, actually, as an outsider, as someone who's come there, does give people hope. And I have to look for hope, because it is very easy to slide into despair and hopelessness and bitterness and resentfulness at the state of the world and what we do to each other. And since the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, my relationship with pacifism has really been challenged. And in this reporting dynamic as well with Alyssa, where I have the privilege of being able to move in and out of that space. And since I'm not Ukrainian, I haven't had to make the decision of whether in what way I will choose resistance against Russian occupation, whether it be to take out arms or to move into journalism or activism. And since I'm a woman and so is Alyssa, she is not faced with conscription. So a lot of our conversations center around this, and they're conversations that are sensitive and difficult to have inside Ukraine, and also to a degree outside Ukraine, that come with a lot of judgment. So that isn't always something we bring to our professional work as photojournalists. It's still important, of course. Objectivity is a ghost. It never existed, in journalism. I'm not buying into that fantasy. But at the same time, there are many ethical constraints that we work under as journalists and photojournalists that become more and more important to adhere to. So I'm asking myself, every time I'm in Ukraine, what choices would I make if my choices were occupation, conscription, being murdered? Would I staying and letting the war pass over me in my hometown and hoping that I survived us, fleeing? I mean, fleeing brings with it a whole set of psychological and spiritual and emotional challenges as well, choosing to save your own life. So I guess my focus as a photojournalist is not really only on war and what that looks like, and how it doesn't always look like we expect it to when we watch news reports or we look at photographs that have been made by other people in other places. But also, how do we tell stories about war, and how do we create harm as photojournalists, and how we are one cog in this war machine. I mean, you can't have a war or a revolution without photographers. I'll speak specifically about photographers, actually. And is the very act of telling war stories through poetry, photographs, art, does the very act of telling those stories in some way romanticize or glamorize the act of war itself? Certainly, as a 16-year-old, that influenced me. I read again and again and saw again and again the narrative that young men usually go off to war to discover that yes, indeed, war is terrible, and they return home to tell everybody else that yes, war is terrible and you shouldn't go. But of course, I wanted to see that for myself and to experience that myself. And my internal world now, beyond the external world of my profession, is one where I am learning to love the world that I live in, and to have the courage to look at it and to see it as it really is, and to still love it, and to still want to be here and want to be part of it. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.